The morning was supposed to be lighthearted, cheerful, and filled with polite conversation. But when Meghan Markle sat across from Al Roker on the Today Show, the temperature in the studio dropped by 10 degrees. What started as a routine celebrity interview soon turned into a tense verbal duel between one of America's most beloved hosts and one of Britain's most controversial royals. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, everyone in the studio knew they had just witnessed a television moment that would be talked about for years. It was just after 8 a.m. at Rockefeller Plaza. Outside, the crowd of onlookers waved their signs and flags, bundled in coats against the crisp New York air. Inside the studio, everything gleamed with early morning energy. Warm lights, fresh flowers, the smell of coffee drifting across the set. Al Roker straightened his notes, gave a quick nod to the floor manager, and smiled as the red light on the camera blinked to life. Welcome back to Today. Joining us now, actress, advocate, and former Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. Applause from the crew, a few claps from the production team. Meghan walked in gracefully, dressed in an ivory blouse and tailored beige blazer, her hair cascading in soft waves. She smiled, but there was something rehearsed about it. Poised, deliberate, controlled. "Good morning, Meghan," Al greeted warmly. "It's great to have you with us." "Thank you, Al," she said, crossing her legs neatly. "Always nice to be invited." Her tone was polite, but there was an unmistakable edge, like glass wrapped in silk. Al brushed it off with a laugh and leaned forward. "You've been incredibly busy. Public appearances, charity work, advocacy. What's been the most fulfilling part of this new chapter for you?" Meghan tilted her head, the faintest smirk forming. I'm always amused when people call it a new chapter. My life didn't start when I left the UK, Al. I've been doing meaningful work long before the cameras noticed." The air shifted slightly. Al nodded slowly, his trademark composure unwavering. "Of course," he said calmly. "I meant in the sense of how things have evolved since moving back to the States. Many viewers are curious about how you and Harry have adjusted." Meghan's smile hardened. "Adjusted? There's nothing to adjust to when you're finally allowed to breathe. We're very happy, very centered. People should really stop assuming change equals struggle." The words hung in the air. Not loud, but sharp enough to make a few crew members exchange glances behind the cameras. Al kept his tone friendly. "That's wonderful to hear. Family life seems to be treating you well." "Of course it is," Meghan replied quickly. "I know the tabloids love to invent stories, but the truth is boring. We're fine. Actually, we're great. Some people just have a hard time accepting that." Her eyes lingered on Al a little too long. He offered a polite chuckle, but even his warmth couldn't smooth over the tension now threading its way into the room. "Let's talk a bit about the royal family," he began carefully. "There's been so much discussion about your time in the UK looking back. Do you have any regrets about how things unfolded?" Meghan's lips curved into what might have been a smile or a warning. "Regrets? I think the real question is whether they have any. I made choices for my well-being, and that's something people still seem allergic to understanding." Al glanced briefly toward the camera before returning to her. "That's a fair point," he said. "But you've spoken before about compassion and healing." "Exactly," she interrupted. "And healing doesn't mean revisiting the past every time a journalist needs a headline." The studio went quiet. Even the steady hum of the lighting rigs felt louder. Al took a slow breath, maintaining his professionalism. "All right, Avishai," he said evenly. "Let's pivot for a moment. How has life in California been for you and your family?" Meghan relaxed slightly, or at least pretended to. "California is home. The sun, the openness, it's miles ahead of certain other places." "Like England?" Al asked gently. Meghan arched a brow. "You said it, not me." Al laughed softly, trying to diffuse the growing edge in her tone. "Do you ever miss it? The royal duties, the traditions?" She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Miss it? Al, no one misses being micromanaged by centuries-old customs. It's the 21st century. I prefer building my own traditions, without the hierarchy." "Fair enough," Al replied smoothly. "Speaking of traditions, you've had quite a career shift over the years. Any chance you might return to acting?" Meghan let out a quiet laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. People love to ask that, don't they? I've moved on, Al. I don't live in reruns. He smiled thinly. Of course. But your fans? Fans are wonderful, she said, cutting him off again, as long as they understand boundaries. I'm not a character anymore. I'm a person. There was a flicker of silence before Al replied. Of course you are, he said softly, and we're grateful you're sharing your story with us this morning. Meghan tilted her head, her smile tightening. Well, she said, some stories are worth hearing. Others just keep getting retold by the wrong people. The music cue rolled for commercial break. Meghan adjusted her blazer, her gaze lingering on Al as if daring him to ask the next question. The tension was subtle but unmistakable now, like static before a storm. And somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered the words everyone was thinking. This is going to explode before the hour's over. When the broadcast returned from the break, the tension that had settled during the commercials hadn't gone anywhere. It had thickened. The studio lights seemed a touch brighter, the air a little heavier. Al Roker straightened his tie, still wearing his practiced, reassuring smile. Meghan, on the other hand, sat perfectly still, her posture regal, her fingers intertwined neatly in her lap. Welcome back to Today, Al began, his tone smooth. We're here with Meghan Markle, talking about her work, her journey, and her life after the royal family. Meghan's lips parted in a polite smile. If by after, you mean finally living life on my own terms, then yes, she said lightly, though her gaze didn't waver from his. Al chuckled softly. That's a good way to put it. Now, Meghan, you've spoken a lot about freedom and independence. What does that look like for you these days? She tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to be noticed. It looks like peace. It looks like finally waking up in the morning without someone telling me how to behave, what to wear, or how to smile. Al nodded. That sounds liberating. But some have suggested that the media attention hasn't really gone away, that in some ways it's even increased. How do you deal with that? Meghan laughed, a sound more sharp than warm. Deal with it? I don't deal with it, Al. I rise above it. There's a big difference. People can speculate all they want. It doesn't define me. Her tone carried that same hint of superiority that had flickered earlier, and Al could feel it now. That unspoken friction between them. Still, he pressed on carefully. You mentioned people speculating, he said, his voice gentle. A lot of that speculation revolves around your marriage. How are you and Harry doing these days? Meghan's eyes narrowed. We're fine. I know everyone wants some kind of juicy headline, trouble in paradise. But I'm sorry to disappoint. Harry and I are solid, stronger than ever, actually. We have a real marriage, not a public performance. Al smiled faintly. That's good to hear. There were rumors about the two of you living separately for a while. Meghan's tone snapped like a whip. Rumors are what the media does best, aren't they? Maybe that's why people have such trouble separating truth from fiction. The control room fell silent. Even the floor manager shifted uncomfortably. Al, ever the professional, gave a small laugh to ease the tension. Well, Meghan, we like to let our guests clear the air. It's part of why you're here. I didn't come here to clear anything, Meghan interrupted again, leaning slightly forward. I came here because people deserve to hear things directly from me, not through headlines written by people who've never met me. Her tone had hardened, her posture more rigid now. Al gave a diplomatic tiad, his composure unbroken. Understood. Let's shift gears then, he said calmly. You've built quite a platform for yourself here in the States. Podcasts, documentaries, charitable work. What's next for you? Meghan's smile returned, though this one felt more like armor. Next, growth, evolution. I don't operate on anyone else's timeline, Al. My projects are about purpose, not profit. But I realize that concept might be hard for some people to grasp. There it was again, the jab hidden behind polite phrasing. Al's expression remained steady, but the control room could sense it. The storm clouds were gathering. Well, speaking of purpose, Al said smoothly, you recently attended an awards ceremony in London, the same week as a major royal event. Some said the timing felt deliberate. Meghan blinked, the faintest laugh escaping her lips. You mean to suggest I planned my life around their calendar? That's adorable, Al smiled politely. It's just that people notice the overlap. People notice everything, she cut in again. That's what happens when you live rent-free in the public's imagination. But I'm not here to play games with the royal family. I'm here because I earned my place. The edge in her voice was impossible to miss. Al's eyes flickered toward her, calm but firm. Do you still speak to them? Meghan hesitated for the first time. I think some relationships are better left in peace, she said finally, though her tone made it clear she didn't intend to elaborate. Specifically with Kate and William, Al pressed gently. The public always wonders if there's been... I'm not interested in discussing people who are part of my past, Meghan said quickly, cutting him off once more. Besides, I find it fascinating that people are still obsessed with whether I text someone I used to share balcony space with. Her sarcasm drew a few uneasy chuckles from the crew. Al forced a polite laugh, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of frustration. He'd handled difficult guests before, but Meghan's mixture of charm and condescension was unlike anything else. All right, he said finally, his voice smooth but tighter now. Let's talk about something lighter. Your life in America. How does it compare? Oh, it's incomparable, she said instantly, smiling smugly. The freedom, the creativity, the diversity. It's a far cry from the gray skies and gossip chains of the UK. Here, I get to choose who I am every day, and I don't have to apologize for it. That sounds wonderful, Al said softly. Though to be fair, you were quite admired in Britain as well. Meghan tilted her head, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Admired? Is that what we're calling it? I'd say scrutinized, villainized, maybe even targeted. But sure, let's call it admiration if it helps people sleep better. The words were sharp, delivered with precision. Al's smile faltered just slightly, barely noticeable, but real. He cleared his throat, regaining control. One last thing before the break, he said. There's been speculation about you returning to acting someday. Is that something you'd ever consider? Meghan gave a dismissive laugh. Acting? I think I've done enough of that for one lifetime, don't you? The room went still. For the first time, Al didn't respond right away. He looked down at his notes, then back up at her, meeting her gaze squarely. That's an interesting way to put it, he said finally. Honesty is interesting, isn't it? Meghan shot back. Sometimes, Al replied softly, and sometimes it's just unkind. For a fleeting second, Meghan's eyes flickered, the faintest crack in her composure. But then her chin lifted again, her voice cool. Well, I've never been one to sugarcoat for comfort. The segment producer made the cut signal, but the energy in the room refused to settle. Al leaned back in his chair, taking a slow breath. Meghan smoothed her blazer with mechanical precision, her jaw clenched. They were only halfway through the show, but everyone, from the sound technician to the camera operator, could feel it. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a countdown. When the cameras blinked back on for the third segment, the friendly facade of the Today Show had all but vanished. The glossy studio set, once filled with the warmth of morning banter, now felt more like a pressure chamber. Even the hum of the lights seemed sharper. Al Roker sat forward slightly, his hands folded neatly on his lap, his tone calm but clipped. Across from him, Meghan Markle appeared utterly composed, almost too composed. Every movement, every breath was deliberate, as though she was performing for an invisible audience. Welcome back, Al began, his voice steady. We're continuing our conversation with Meghan Markle. And Meghan, I'd like to ask about your public image, something that seems to follow you wherever you go. She gave a faint, knowing laugh. Public image. That's such a convenient phrase, isn't it? It makes it sound like there's a difference between who I am and who people think I am. But I don't wake up in the morning asking permission to be liked, Al. I just exist. Al smiled tightly. I understand. But I think what people are curious about is the contradiction. You've often said you value privacy, yet you've shared so much of your life through interviews, documentaries, even books. Some viewers wonder, how do you reconcile that? Meghan's smile thinned. Ah, the famous contradiction question, she said, leaning back slightly. I find it fascinating that people have such a hard time understanding boundaries. Sharing my perspective doesn't mean surrendering my privacy. It means taking control of the narrative that others tried to hijack. Al nodded slowly, choosing his words carefully. So, in your mind, that's empowerment? In my mind, Meghan echoed with a soft scoff. No, Al, it's not just in my mind. It is empowerment. For too long, people, especially women, have been told to stay quiet, to be grateful, to smile and nod. I didn't move across an ocean just to play that role again. Al gave a polite smile. Fair enough. But critics have said that some of your recent projects, like the podcast and the Netflix special, felt more like public rebuttals than personal storytelling. How do you respond to that? Meghan's eyes flashed. Critics, she said, the word dripping with disdain. It's always critics, isn't it? People who sit on their couches judging others for daring to live authentically. I don't need to explain myself to people who only consume headlines. The silence that followed was palpable. Even through the studio glass, producers exchanged worried glances. An owl cleared his throat and tried again, his tone even softer now. All right, Vishen, he said, let's talk about something more reflective. When you look back at your time with the royal family, what stands out the most to you now? Meghan hesitated for a moment, then folded her arms. Honestly, the performance of it all, the pageantry, the smiles, the expectations. It's theater, Al. It's an illusion people buy into because it's easier than facing reality. Everyone wants their fairy tale, and I was supposed to play a part in theirs. But that's not me. Her words landed with weight. Al leaned back, nodding thoughtfully. You've used that word before, performance. Do you think your time as an actress helped prepare you for that environment? A dry smile flickered across her lips. No acting class in the world prepares you for that level of scrutiny. Hollywood was honest about what it wanted: ratings, beauty, talent. The palace wanted obedience dressed up as grace. There was an audible murmur from somewhere offset. Al pressed on gently. That's a powerful statement. Do you think that perception of control, of expectation, still affects how you see your role today? I don't see myself as having a role anymore, Meghan replied, her tone hardening. That's the problem. People like to assign labels: actress, duchess, activist, villain. It's exhausting. Maybe the world should try understanding me as a person instead of a headline. Al nodded again, his expression unreadable. You've spoken a lot about the media, Meghan, about control and narratives. But I'm curious, do you think some of that same energy comes from you as well? From the way you respond, from how you push back? Meghan's eyes narrowed. Push back? That's an interesting choice of words. I just mean, Al clarified, you've always been outspoken. You've taken control of your story, but at times it seems to create even more controversy. Do you ever worry that your tone, your approach, might alienate people who once supported you? Meghan straightened in her seat, her gaze sharpening. You're suggesting that honesty alienates people? I'm suggesting, Al replied calmly, that sometimes delivery matters as much as the message. Her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, her polished composure faltered. So what, Al? I should be more palatable? Softer? Smile through the double standards? I've done that, and it didn't work. Al met her stare evenly. I don't think anyone's asking you to smile. Just to recognize that people listen more when they feel respected. The air in the studio grew tense. Meghan laughed, but the sound carried no humor. Respect goes both ways, doesn't it? Maybe the media should try earning it before demanding it. Al's jaw tightened ever so slightly, though his voice remained calm. I think the media's job is to ask questions, Meghan. Sometimes difficult ones. Sure, she said, the sarcasm curling around each word, as long as those questions don't make anyone uncomfortable. He gave a small sigh, glancing briefly toward the control booth before turning back to her. Let's talk about your family then. Your late mother-in-law, Princess Diana, remains an iconic figure to this day. Many see parallels between your experiences and hers. Do you ever feel connected to that legacy? For the first time, Meghan's expression hardened completely. Diana deserves peace, Al. She's not a comparison point for your interview questions. I understand, he said gently. I only meant— No, Meghan interrupted sharply. You meant to invoke emotion, to paint me as another tragedy waiting to happen. I'm not her, Al. I never claimed to be. A deep silence filled the room. Cameras whirred softly, capturing every flicker of tension. Al sat back, folding his hands once more. You're right, he said, his tone even. You're not her. But she faced the press with courage. And sometimes courage isn't about fighting. It's about listening. For a moment, Meghan's expression cracked, just slightly, before she recovered. Well, she said quietly, maybe I just don't have patience for double standards anymore. Al smiled faintly, his voice low. Patience isn't weakness, Meghan. It's strength. Or maybe it's complacency, she shot back. Their gazes locked. Two professionals, each too seasoned, too proud to back down. The room seemed to hum with the heat of unspoken words. And then a producer's voice cut faintly through the earpieces. One more segment. God help us all. Both of them sat motionless, staring across the table as the countdown to the final act began. The smiles had vanished. Only the sparks remained. The final segment began under a silence so heavy, even the hum of the studio lights seemed reluctant to break it. Cameras refocused. A producer's voice echoed faintly through the earpieces. We're live in 3, 2, 1. The familiar Today Show jingle faded out, and Al Roker's voice returned, lower, steadier now. We're back with Meghan Markle, he said, his smile practiced but brittle around the edges. And before the break, we were discussing how media narratives shape public perception. Meghan shifted slightly, crossing one leg over the other, the faint scrape of fabric echoing in the quiet. Yes, she said, her tone sharp yet measured. Though I think what shapes perception more than anything is bias, and I think we've seen plenty of that this morning. Al blinked once, slowly. Bias? Let's not pretend it isn't there, Al, Meghan said, leaning forward. Every time I sit in a chair like this, the questions are the same. Invasive, slanted, designed to trap me into defending myself. I came here thinking we'd have a real conversation about my work, my causes, but instead we're back to the same tired narratives. Monarchy, Diana, family gossip. It's lazy journalism. The audience behind the glass, small, silent, mostly crew, exchanged uncertain glances. Al kept his composure, though his tone cooled. Meghan, with respect, the questions I've asked are the same ones viewers at home want answers to. That's not bias, that's transparency. Meghan tilted her head slightly, an icy smile curling at the edges of her lips. Transparency is a word people like to hide behind when they're really just looking for headlines. That earned a faint sigh from Al. I'm not sure that's fair, he said quietly. My job isn't to provoke, it's to understand. Then maybe try listening instead of interpreting, Meghan shot back. The temperature in the studio seemed to plummet. Al folded his hands slowly, his usual warm demeanor now hardened into something quieter. Something restrained but unmistakably firm. I have been listening, and he said, but what I'm hearing doesn't sound like understanding. It sounds like defensiveness, Meghan's eyes flashed. Oh, so now I'm defensive for not tolerating invasive questions? That's convenient, not invasive, Al replied. Challenging. There's a difference. You've built a career on speaking truth to power, but it feels like you only want that truth when it comes from your side. For the first time, Meghan faltered slightly. She blinked, then gave a sharp laugh, one that was far too loud for the room. Oh, that's rich. You're accusing me of bias? That's exactly what happens when a woman refuses to play small. You twist confidence into arrogance. Confidence and contempt aren't the same thing, Al said evenly. Something shifted in Meghan's posture. Her chin lifted, her voice rising just a notch. Maybe it's time men like you stop deciding what confidence should look like. I didn't come here for a lecture, Al. And I didn't come here for condescension, he replied, his tone firm now. The tension snapped like static. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath from the crew. Meghan stared at him, stunned that he'd finally pushed back. Condescension? She repeated, her voice dripping disbelief. I'm simply standing my ground. There's a way to do that, Al said, leaning forward slightly, without treating everyone else in the room like they're beneath you. This is the Today Show, not Buckingham Palace. The words hit like a hammer. Meghan froze, her jaw tightening. For a long moment, she didn't speak, just stared at him, fury burning behind her carefully composed mask. You're out of line, she said finally, her voice low and trembling. And you're out of patience, Al replied softly. For everyone but yourself. The silence that followed was unbearable. The teleprompter operator's hands hovered uncertainly. Someone coughed in the corner. Then Meghan stood up. It wasn't sudden or chaotic. It was slow, deliberate. She smoothed her blazer, adjusted her microphone, and looked directly into the camera with a tight smile that barely masked the storm in her eyes. You know, she said, her voice steady but shaking at the edges, this is exactly why I rarely do interviews anymore. Because no matter how respectful I try to be, people always show their true colors in the end. She turned her gaze toward Al, eyes narrowing. You invited me here to talk about my work, but you really just wanted another royal headline. Congratulations. You got one. Al opened his mouth, but before he could reply, Meghan unclipped her microphone and set it gently on the table. I think we're done here, she said, her tone clipped and final, and then she walked off. The echo of her heels against the polished studio floor rang louder than anything that had been said. The cameras kept rolling for several seconds, catching the stunned faces of the crew. The flicker of uncertainty across Al's usually calm expression. Finally, he exhaled, straightened his notes, and turned to face the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice low, I want to apologize for what just happened. Live television is unpredictable, and sometimes emotions take over. That was not the interview any of us intended, and I take responsibility for my part in it. He paused, his expression softening. But I'll say this, every guest who sits in this chair deserves respect, and that goes both ways. For a brief second, his eyes flickered toward the direction Meghan had exited, then back to the camera. This was supposed to be a conversation, he said quietly, not a confrontation. I hope, moving forward, we can all learn to listen, really listen, even when we don't like what we hear. The studio remained in stunned silence. No one moved. The teleprompter stopped scrolling. Then, with a deep breath, Al gave the smallest of smiles. Weary, but genuine. We'll be right back, he said finally. The screen faded to black. The woman who once married into royalty had just walked out of morning television. And once again, the world was watching her leave. If you think you've seen explosive interviews before, this one might just top them all. Do you think Meghan was unfairly treated? Or did Al Roker simply refuse to be disrespected on live TV? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because what's coming next might just be even more dramatic.